interested in rigging and weight painting. Were there specific issues that you were having? Or should I just sort of like go through the whole weight painting process again?
I think like painting within Maya and like the process of doing that was my biggest issue.
Okay.
So I would like overwrite stuff I was doing and how
Gotcha.
I view clones, how it influenced.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna go through and grab my, where am I going? Let me grab my rig really quick and then I will, oh my God, what am I doing? Projects. Tra-la-la. So I think I'm just gonna use the rig that was under the extra credit file. So if you guys wanna follow along, that is the rig I'll be using. If it loads, there we go. Just gonna ignore the small heads at the bottom of the scene. All right, so this is like the sort of rigged character that I've had and I've been using for like a weird freelance gig. So I'm just gonna go through and like turn off, I can turn off the controllers, I'll turn off, I don't want IK handles. And I guess we'll turn off joints. That's probably dumb. All right, so I'm just gonna go shade X-ray joints. And I'm just gonna go through and I guess you probably don't care about like his shirt. Just like weird note with the armor. So this is like one of those instances where like technically each piece of this armor, like this is only gonna follow his head. This is only gonna follow like his upper leg, etc. So I kept them as one piece just to simplify the outliner. And then I just bound the skin to the whole rig, and if you look at the weights for that, eventually, you can see that like the weights are pretty much only weighted to specific joints. So that's usually how I would accomplish something like that for like armor. Also works for eyeballs, etc. But that being said, does anybody care about the armor, or can I just go ahead and like delete that from the scene? I could actually just hide it. That's not instructive. All right, so I'm gonna go through. I'm going to. Did I show you guys importing weight maps? Was that a thing that I did? All right, I'll show you guys the weights or the weight maps. So this character is actually like already rigged and like already bound and all that good stuff. He should have halfway decent deformations. So if you ever want to like save your weights from a character, going in like a little bit of a weird order, go into your rigging menu, skin, and then export weight maps. And usually I set this to like, what is it? This. I've never found a huge difference between alpha and luminance, to be honest, and I'll usually set the image format to something like a JPEG, where just because like I don't know what the heck ifs are. At least with a JPEG, I can go back and like sort of see the values. It'll ask where you want to stick stuff, and I guess I will just do it in my desktop and not set my project at all. Weights, It'll ask like how many, basically based on how many joints you have, do you want to actually write the maps? And you say yes. And it goes through, if you can see the bottom of the screen, it's just sort of cycling through and writing a bunch of maps. So if I go in and look at my desktop, you'll see that there is a little weights.weightmap file, and there is a giant folder full of, there is a giant folder full of all of these JPEG images with like different weird sort of black and white values. And these correspond to your UVs. So if you're going to do this, your character does need to be UV'd before doing this. And you'll notice like this is the head of the character. So like this is like the weights for the head. So it'll tell you like the object that you exported the maps for, as well as the joint for each particular image. Like this is the chest, or I'm sorry, this is the head. So you can see there's like most of the weight is on the head, and there's nothing like on the, I think this is like the chest. The jaw, you can see like here's the values for the jaw, which are kind of like taken out of this map here. So this is basically like how it's transcribing that information into data it can read later. It's just black and white values based on your UVs. So, any questions on that? All right. So if I go through and I just unbind that skin, it is unbound. I'll go ahead and rebind this. So again, in this case, I have some pretty decent weights already saved. So I'm just going to still go through and I just check my bind to options. So I could do joint hierarchy. So that's going to be whatever, like any joint that's connected to the, I think in this case I selected pelvis. It's going to attach to your rig. There's also the option for selected joints, and that would be like, I only want to bind a piece of armor to like a specific part of the arm, or like an eyeball to an eye. It's not going to grab any joints that are connected to the one you've selected already, if that makes sense. So that's bind to. Object hierarchy, honestly, I have literally never used it. I'm assuming if you have objects parented to this, it will also attach them to the skeleton. I've just never found a reason to use that ever. For bind method and the skinning method, usually like skinning method is just different like mathematical equations to calculate skinning. If your deformations look a little weird the first time, maybe try another one and see if it gets you closer to what you want. But again, it's kind of just like same thing with skinning method. It's kind of just like a crapshoot. To me, they all kind of do the same thing, but you can play with them if you want to. The other things that I usually pay attention to are the max influences. So that's going to be how many joints can affect a particular vertex on your character. So if it's 5, you can have up to 5 joints that are affecting a particular vertex. What this value is depends a lot on what you're rigging and your personal preferences. I usually set it to 3 because to me that's kind of what seems sane. This rig I'm actually doing for like a guy who made his own game engine, and that game engine can only support 4 influences. Like there have to be 4 influences on a joint. So I have to set that to 4, and it's just like do a bunch of other weird hoops to jump through for that. But again, choose kind of whatever works for you. You can overwrite this later and like add or take away more weights if you have maintain max influences turned off. So that's usually the only thing that I kind of like pay attention to is like, again, max influences and maintain max influences. So with this turned off, it'll let you, if you start with say three joints influencing a vertex, you can set that so only one joint is influencing them, which is great for, again, stuff like the top of the head or like a finger joint, like the ends of your fingers. With maintain max influences turned on, it's weird because sometimes it causes no issues whatsoever, and sometimes it makes weight painting like a living hell. Where you go and you do something really nice for the arm, and then you go and you do something on the chest, and then it'll like overwrite all of your values on the arm. Basically what it's trying to do is forcibly make sure that at any given point, one vertex has the maximum number of influences possible. So if this is set to 3, it's going to say, all right, this vertex has to at all times be influenced by at least 3 joints. If this is set to 10, you're going to have a lot of nightmares with your rig. So if you guys ever have issues with weight painting where it seems like your values are sort of getting overridden for no apparent reason, it might not be a terrible idea to sort of export some weight maps for your character, and then unbind him, rebind him, make sure that you turn off maintain max influences. And sometimes that can fix some of the issues. But yeah, that's basically that. Anybody have any questions on that? All right. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and hit apply. Oh, yelling me to select a joint. I'm going to select a joint, hit apply, and then go through. And you'll notice that, like, again, it's the character is like now bound. It's just doing some real. I apparently can't function with all of these FK controllers turned on. So if you guys have played with this rig, you'll notice that there are lots of switches for like IK and FK and all the controllers, and that's all good stuff you'll learn in animation too. Makes the rig really usable. But like obviously these weights are trash. So this is actually sort of the I guess bit before, or someone mentioned like moving the arm, move part of their heads. You'd use weight painting to fix that. I'll go over that in a second. But so again, if you have weight saved like I do, just click on your skin, go to skin, import weight maps, and if you've set your project like a good person, which I haven't, it should just take you to like your source images or wherever you put these. I'm just gonna go to my desktop, and you want to click on this weights.weightmap thing, and it'll go through and just sort of like create this crazy rainbow of terror as it rebinds your mesh. And you'll see that like now the weights for the legs and stuff are completely fixed, and this like all the weight painting that I had before, which is all good and nice, has been saved and transferred onto this character. So that's pretty handy. I usually do a backup of my weights for a character in case Maya goes nuts and like deletes all your weights, which I've had happen before, cough. Or in this case, like if I accidentally break the rig somehow and I need to like unbind it and rebind it, I don't need to redo all my weights, which I've spent 4 hours on. So usually, again, if you're happy with your weights, not a terrible idea to just like export a quick weight map so you have it if you need it in the future. Where the weight maps break down, if I were to rename this character, my God, why? This is the most convoluted thing I've ever called an object in my scene. But if I were to like rename that just like dude buff, it wouldn't know what object I was trying to apply it to, and it would yell at you, and there's weird workarounds for it. But usually it involves editing the names of like all of your files and then like hacking into the weight map itself and like tweaking some stuff. So I'd recommend just like name your things logically the first time, and then you don't need to worry about that. Alternately, like consult the internet for the specific ways to do that, because it can be kind of like a weird, awful process that I honestly don't remember how to do off the top of my head. But yeah, so just like, again, before you export your weight maps, make sure your stuff is named appropriately. Other things that would affect your weight maps are changing the UVs. Since weight maps are UV dependent, if you like do something crazy like re-UV your whole object, that's going to mess up your weights. In the case that like you need to maybe add a piece of geometry onto the skeleton, you can tweak your weights or your UVs, and just like if some of them are the same, it will transfer the weights to those parts with the same UVs. Anything you've shifted around is a complete crapshoot, and you'll probably just have to like redo from scratch. But that's basically importing and exporting weight maps. Does anybody have any questions on that before I go on to more of like actual weight painting? All right, cool. So I'm going to unbind this dude and rebind this dude again with hopefully the same settings I've used last time. And fantastic, we have extremely broken legs. Also have his delightful little controls for like the shirt he wears. Oh God, that's not flattering. It looks like he has an alien baby in his leg. All right, so easy ways to skeleton. So easy ways to go through and sort of tweak like really obvious issues like the right leg is hijacking part of the left leg, is to just click on your mesh, go to vertices, and just marquee select like the entire leg in question. And if you go, and this is like usually what I'll sort of start off doing just to like clean up these really grotesquely obvious errors where like something's being selected and it shouldn't be. So go to Windows, General Editors, and Component Editor. And if you expand that and go over to Smooth Skins, it will show you a list of all of the vertices that you have selected. In this case, it's apparently a lot, as well as all of the weights that are influencing that particular vertex. So what I can do is go through, I tend to label my characters from the character's point of view, so like their right leg is what I call right. So in this case, you can see like the left leg is dragging the right leg with it. What I can do is just go through and do really, really blanket edits. So we'll just go through and be like, all right, any left influence on this leg, I want to be set to 0, and it's going to snap all of that leg stuff back to where it should be. So I'll usually go through and again do that for like really obvious stuff like legs. In this case, it is the left leg, so I can go through and get rid of all of the weights from right part of the body. That kind of fixes that a little bit. You'll also notice that like right now he has joints for his little skirt thing on his shirt, and that is affecting his leg, which is incredibly awkward and undesirable. So I'm just gonna like turn that off. And I will also, so sometimes I'll just do like really hardcore blanket sweeping edits and be like, all right, that skirt should not be affecting his skin because his skin is not a skirt. Let me just get rid of that on all of his lower body. And now the weights on this are doing something terrible. All right. So I'm going to assume, so it looks like what's happening here for like these little pieces. I like the component editor a lot for going through and being like, all right, what exactly are the number values that is happening? Like, why is this leg deforming hideously? Because it's clearly not the skirt joint anymore. And in this case, like, it should be following the left hip, but what it's doing is following the pelvis, which I have not moved at all. So I'm just going to go through and maybe set that to like 0.9 or something a little bit more reasonable. And just go through and kind of do that. So that kind of like helps fix some of those issues. So I also will usually use this a lot for stuff like bending elbows or bending knees. This is all kinds of creepy looking. So for knees and also like, again, knees, elbows, fingers, I love the component editor for. I will go through and just sort of do like a combination of like finessing and blanket statements or like blanket changes. So I'm just going to go through and I think I mentioned this before, but if you guys weren't aware, you can actually select rings of vertices, kind of the same way you do edge loops. So click on one vert, hold down shift, and then double click the one next to it, and it'll select that whole loop of vertices, which is also very handy for doing stuff like this. And in this case, like I don't want this to have any pelvis weight because it's too far down the leg for that to make sense. So I'm just going to sort of go through and work on the parts of the leg and be like, all right, so again, I don't really want pelvis weight on this. That's kind of weird because the pelvis is like up here. That doesn't make sense. I'll go through for the knee and maybe set this to like 0.1. And it's just like a fairly convenient way to get like standardized weights within a specific area of your model, where maybe it's a little bit either like, in the case of fingers, like physically hard to access with the paint weights tool because the fingers are all smushed into each other. But it also just gives you really, really easy control over, ooh, hello. Haha, when you do a bad thing, it gives you really easy control over like the specific values you're entering and can just like, I don't know. I just think it makes life a little bit easier to be able to come in and like do stuff like this. So I could go through and again, just like sort of keep refining that until I get a value that I am happy with for like the bend of this knee. I'm not going to do anything like super crazy with it. Mostly just like sort of give you guys the idea of how I do a lot of this stuff. I say as I continue to refine it because I can't help myself. All right, so you can do something like that, which to me looks a little bit better than the default weights. Away, ground plane. Which were these. So you can see like we have, again, and this character is actually designed to be low poly, so I'm not going to smooth him. I will turn on screen spacing and occlusion and the anti-aliasing because it kind of is easier to look at. So you can see this like really awkward default knee weights versus the sort of nicer cleaned up ones on this side. And that's fairly easy to do, again, with the component editor. For squishier areas of the body, a lot of times like areas around, like the hip and the spine, I will do that with the paint weights tool itself, which honestly, for some reason, I kind of hate it and I try to avoid it as much as possible, which is just like me being a spaz. So, paint weights tool itself. I will do perhaps something on the shoulder because that looks terrible. So I'm just going to go through and like shoulders always suck. Like shoulders are always evil. So just grab your mesh, right click and do paint skin weights tool. And I usually, so like by default, it's going to be, let's see, grab up to, I actually just realized the other day you can also order this alphabetically, which is kind of nice if you're looking for a specific joint. So by default, it is set to the black and white view, which to me is hard to look at. It doesn't quite give me the color value or like the information that I want. I can't tell what's mostly white and what's actually white. So I'll go ahead and turn on the use color ramp. If you scroll down under the gradient section, you'll find that there. And basically what this does is gives you some extra information to look at. So like anything that's black, like actual black, is no weight at all from that specific joint. Anything that's white is a full weight value of 1. And then anything that's sort of like, the redder you get, the more weight it is until you actually hit white or 1. So you can see like what this is like actually kind of reddy orange, but in the color ramp, without the color ramp, as far as I could tell, all of this was completely bound to the shoulder. So that's why I like the color ramp. I just think it's easier to look at. In terms of actually using this tool, so there is, if you scroll down, you can modify your brush size under stroke. So I'm just going to say that feels kind of reasonable, I guess. And you can also go in and select sort of like different brushes like you would in Photoshop. So there's one with like super, super fuzzy edges, kind of fuzzy edges. This one is basically a completely hard brush in Photoshop with no feathering. And you can use a square. I don't know why you'd want that, but you can do it, and you can also import your own images, which also I'm still not really sure why you'd want. So usually I'll just go back and forth between these two brushes here. I just find them to be kind of the easiest to work with. And then paint operation, again, usually there's two that I work with because I just think they kind of make sense to like the way my brain works. And that is replace, which is going to basically color over your original value. And there's smooth, which works a little bit like the sort of fuzzy brush in Photoshop, or like the smudge brush, where it's not, you're not actually adding or subtracting value, it's just sort of going through and like evening out the values in a specific area. So if I, like on the shoulder, went through and used the smooth brush on the chest, you can see it's kind of like punching in some of those like really, like here we have this like sort of really aggressive area where the weights aren't even on this vertex at all. If I hit that with the smooth brush, it kind of like normalizes all of those values. At this point, that actually kind of, yeah. So like I said, shoulders are always weird. They either look good when they're down, like this looks pretty decent, and then you move them up and you're like, oh great, the whole chest is like bulging out. So if I go back to my weights tool, I grab the chest joint. This is where, like, you can only do so much with smooth, so like, I can keep smoothing this, and at this point it's actually adding weight to the shoulders. So what I would want to do is go in with the replace brush, and opacity is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It behaves like it does in Photoshop and every other program. Value is a slider from 0 to 1, 1 being full weight or like add weight on the joint in question, and 0 is like remove weight. So you can kind of like play with these slider values. I usually just sort of set the value to 1 and then I'll bump the opacity down. It's kind of like how I like working. Again, completely dependent on how you guys like doing things. And then I'll just sort of keep coloring over the, oh my God, it's not how a shoulder should bend. I'll just kind of keep coloring over the areas of the chest, and you'll notice like as I do that, the more times I color over it, the redder it gets. And that's just because I have value set to 1 and opacity turned down low. So again, kind of works same as anything else. But now I'm gonna drink water. I sound like a crazy person. So you'll see, ooh, that's much better. The chest is now sort of not following the shoulder. And now it's probably a little bit too much weight on the chest, so I could go back with my smooth brush and just sort of like paint that down a little bit. And that's a lot of times what I'll do. I'll like overdo the weights for a specific area and then kind of go back with my smooth brush and use that to normalize them and like make them less harsh. So in this case, we have apparently shoulder weights that actually look pretty good for once. This is like a little bit of weird stuff under the arm. That would probably be something. Let me see if I can go through. Perhaps the smooth brush will fix that. Maybe not. Okay. So the area under the arm is like always really annoying, but like basically you can just go through. You can also go through with your component editor and modify some stuff. Like it looks like this part of the arm is just being like aggressively ripped upwards. But for now, I'm going to say this is like fairly decent for the arm. So I'll also use the paint weights tool a lot for like the area around the neck, the head, and it's great for stuff like the jaw. Limbs are always my favorite though, because I can just be like, oh great, like the shins should only follow the knee because that makes sense. There's also another tool which almost never works for me. And that's the hammer weights tool. I'll see if I can get that to work in a minute. The other thing I just wanted to mention really quickly, so it's almost impossible with this soft brush to paint a weight value of solid 1 or white. So I'm just going to set opacity and value all the way up. I just go into my shoulder and be like, you can see like I'm coloring over this like repeatedly, and it's like it takes me a long time to actually hit white on these values. If you want to make that quicker, grab the brush without any softness, and then as soon as you paint over it, it's immediately, it immediately sets that value to white. Same thing for like if I set this to 0, it would just remove all the weights from that. So if you're looking for like that kind of very quick editing with the paint weights tool, replace brush, no softness on edges of brush, and then just opacity all the way to 1 and value to whatever you want it to be. You can also do half values. I've just never found this to be particularly helpful, but you can do it if you need that functionality. So that would basically be the equivalent of like doing what I just did in the component editor with manually setting values, but doing it with the paint skin weights tool. Any questions so far? All right. So I want to see really quick if I can make an ugly broken area on this, like that. So there is a feature in the paint skin weights tool which sometimes works for me and sometimes doesn't for no apparent reason. But you can go through, if you select specific vertices and go into your paint skin weights tool, there's this weird little hammer button, and what that's supposed to do is be like, all right, these values clearly have insane weights on them. So I need to like basically hammer them back into place. And I think if I recall, it actually only works with one vert at once, and sometimes it'll still yell at you about, it'll like throw this error of like, no suitable object, blah, 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 was selected. To be honest, I barely use that tool, and I usually don't investigate what this means. So I'm actually not sure what this error is or how to fix it. If you guys ever need to, you can just copy like this, you can copy pretty much any error message and just paste it into Google, and it'll usually bring up a bunch of stuff about that specific error if you guys ever need to troubleshoot stuff like that. That is like what I do 80% of the time when I don't know what Maya's doing. But yeah, so in this case, I'd probably just go through with the component editor and be like, no weights, haha. But there is actually a nice way to copy weights from one side of the body to the other so that you don't need to do it manually twice. Before I do that, does anybody have any questions on anything I've done so far? All right. So I'm always paranoid, and I don't like doing anything to my rig when it's not in the default bind pose. So I'm gonna set that back to default bind pose, click on my skin, and then go under the skin tab, go down to, holy crap, there's a button for hammer skin weights, which I've just never noted. Okay, wait, now I actually need to try this. I don't expect this is going to work, but it's interesting that it's there. Hammer skin weights. Holy crap! All right, well that's exciting. So I literally just noticed that there is under the skin tab, there is a literal button for hammer skin weights, which works for multiple vertices at once, and seems to actually function. So I'm just gonna do hammer skin weights. And in this case, so I've selected a bunch of the vertices around that horrible patch that I mushed up. So it's kind of like averaging them the best that it can. If I do these, you can see it's sort of like bringing it slowly back into place. If there's like 1 or 2 vertices that are like clearly wrong, like this patch, I can just use the tool and it seems to pop them back really nicely back into place. And that's actually easier to get to than the one in the paint skin weights tool menu, so that's delightful. I might use that now. Either way, so mirroring skin weights. Skin menu again, go to mirror skin weights, and usually you'll have to open the tool settings for this. And this is one of those weird tools another one where I can never remember which stupid axis I'm supposed to go across. So I'm just gonna try this one and see if it works. The direction is basically, do you want to take this side and put it on this side or vice versa? And you can kind of tell, again, you can always just like do it by undo testing, but you can kind of tell if you're looking at this little gimbal or like thing in the bottom, usually the side where the axis is written on, so like if you're looking at the X, that side is going to be positive, and then the side without the line is the negative side, if that makes sense. So if you're looking at this, like in this case, this side would be the positive side of x, and this would be the negative side. Same thing for y, like anything, you know, on the top is positive, anything below is negative. So you can kind of like use that to reference things. So in this case, it does look like I want actually positive to negative. And there's a bunch of different ways to do this. You can do like closest component or closest point on surface and raycast are usually what I do. Raycasting, I don't know how to describe it. It kind of like I think it like draws sort of lines or rays. Like, you know how if you're rendering, light send out rays to sort of like test things? That's kind of what raycast is for skin. So it'll try to like project across and like see when it hits stuff, I think. Closest point on surface is going to be like usually what I'll use, since my model is symmetrical, like this point on the upper arm should be the same position as this point on the lower arm. So usually I try to stick to this if I can. And then influence association is going to be, you can do either like closest joint, so that, in this case the rig is a little weird because there's like one extra sword joint that goes from the root up here. So my mesh is symmetrical, my rig is not. So what I would probably want to do here is actually 1-to-1. So it's going to grab the weights from like the left shoulder and put it on the right shoulder. And it should, hopefully, ignore that ridiculous extra sword joint because it's like nothing really is happening with that. So I'm just going to try these settings, honestly, and see what happens after I select my skin. So I've done a little bit on the legs, so that'll be like kind of hard to tell if that has worked. Let's see. Usually I just look at it, so like a lot of times, I think it's copied over correctly because it looks like the shoulder is behaving in a not completely insane way. Usually one side of the rig will be extremely broken, so if both sides are then extremely broken, you need to undo that and redo it and just turn off the positive to negative values. So like let me really quick intentionally break these skin weights. Sure. This seems like a great way to move a shoulder. So if I do this again, I'll grab this and I'll do apply. And yeah, so like you'll notice like here's the awful shoulder weights I painted on, which have now been transferred to this side of the body. In that case, I think that was a poor decision because those are really bad shoulder weights, which I still have on my mesh. So if that's the case, like if I wanted, in this case, maybe this side to be mirrored over here, again, just uncheck the positive to negative, grab your skin, hit apply, and now we okay. So now we have, this is actually like, is better than what we started with originally. It's just, so like the shoulder weights themselves are fine. It's just, if you look, it's the chest area that it's like, I don't really know how to mirror this. It's directly in the center of the body. So that's the point where you usually just sort of go through, again, with your replace brush, value of 0, and just be like, no, and get rid of that. So that is like the pretty much most or all of like the basic stuff that I usually do for weight painting. You can, again, I mentioned, I think last week, you can have multiple meshes bound to the same rig. You just need to weight paint them individually if that is the case. That's pretty much weight painting. Ow. Does anybody have any questions on that? Cool. I'm going to take that as a no. Is there any other stuff, rigging or otherwise, you guys want to go over?
One unrelated question.
I like unrelated.
When I was setting up the NURBS curves as the IK handles, the curve itself didn't have that twist value. So when I tried to constrain it with, I was following the class video. I couldn't constrain it to the twist value of the foot. It was for rotating the rig, so that the foot didn't stay planted in the spot.
Wait, so like this twist value that would like control the IK handle?
Yeah, it didn't have that twist value, so I couldn't constrain it.
Yeah, so that would be just like a custom attribute you'd want to make.
Okay, that's all I was wondering. Where that came from.
Gotcha. Yep.
Cool.
And you'll notice I have like a bajillion of them to control the feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feet are fun. Cool. Any other questions? All right. In that case, be free again.